Hello, my name is Youssef Munayer, and here at the Palestine Center, we're happy to bring you from time to time important interviews on pertinent events taking place throughout world affairs, particularly regarding Palestine. And we're very happy to have here with us today Ambassador Afif Safieh, who has been a long-time diplomat serving the Palestinian cause in many different capitals around the world. And we're privileged to be able to discuss with him various issues that are evolving today in Palestine, including the ongoing reconciliation agreement between Hamas and Fatah, the impending drive to statehood and membership in the United Nations through the United Nations General Assembly, and also the current condition of the peace process here in Washington, D.C. So I'm very happy to have Ambassador Afif Safieh here with me today.
It's a pleasure for me to be with you today.
It's great to have you again. Ambassador, I want to start with the Hamas-Fatah reconciliation agreement. The parties came together and signed an agreement recently, and I want to hear your view of why this happened now, why it took so long, what are the conditions within the agreement, and what you think are the potential tests that it will face and whether or not it will last.
First of all, I believe I share the joy of the Palestinian people of the reconciliation signed in Cairo over a month ago, because I believe that the fracture in our political system was extremely damaging to our society and to our posture around the world. The Israelis, who don't need pretexts, invoked Palestinian division to hide behind their finger and to avoid serious deadlines and progress in the peace process. I believe, sir, that we, the Palestinians, we can pride ourselves by saying that since the resurrecting national movement reawakened in the middle of the 60s, we were always a multi-party system, even when we were a diaspora phenomenon only in exile. And we have cultivated democracy, pluralism for 4 decades. And we have had several elections in 1996, last century, and 2005, 2006, that were impeccable, competitive, internationally monitored, and that's the way it ought to be. I believe that any Democrat would tell that what we need to have is constitutional pluralism, the rule of the majority, the respect for the minority, and that the last election should not be the last election. We suffered a breakdown in our political system in 2006, and it was damaging, devastating. Both wings of the emerging Palestinian entity, the West Bank and Gaza, were going in separate ways under ideologically competing governments of different colorations, etc. Now, for a variety of factors that need to be seriously analyzed, they moved towards signing an agreement. I have a grievance that they are implementing it too slowly for my taste. I would have preferred Fatah and Hamas, with the other factions, agreeing on an impeccable government of independents and technocrats, announced the day Netanyahu was in Washington to deliver his speech in Congress on Capitol Hill, depriving him of half of the arguments of his pre-written speech that we could have anticipated what the content would be. Unfortunately, the political process in the Middle East is too slow for my taste, and we deal with the factor of time in a way that needs some improvement. What are the factors that led to the signature? I believe both factions were at a dead end. Hamas, with the blah 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 about the culture of resistance, etc., has discovered, now that they were in charge of Gaza, about the burden of responsibility and how to be a rational actor, moving beyond phraseology, etc. And as you see, today they were adopting patterns of behavior not unlike their predecessors in Gaza, meaning us, Fatah, thinking that launching unguided missiles made very amateurishly is not helpful to the national cause, but can draw disproportionate retaliations with the devastations we know. The authority, the PLO, were also at a dead end, because the process, there was neither peace nor a process these days, and we felt that there should be national unity before we face the next phase. These two factors were important. Both sides were at a dead end. There was the pressure of public opinion. And to tell you frankly, I've always encouraged Palestinian public opinion, who is politically educated and sophisticated, to be more demanding from the political establishment, left, right, and center. And there was this time serious public opinion pressure, both in Gaza, more in Gaza than in the West Bank, but both in Gaza and the West Bank, demanding a move towards reconciliation. And I believe any political party who doesn't have their antennas in public opinion are doomed to failure and to shrink in their appeal. The third factor was the wind of change in the region, and mainly in two countries, Egypt and Syria. In Syria, sir, I think that Hamas, who has been located with its headquarters in Damascus, has been embarrassed vis-à-vis the state and the society at the same time by the events taking place. Why? Because the state, the regime in Syria, was expecting Hamas out of gratitude to side with it and to attack those who were protesting and the dissenters, etc. And the society expected from a resistance movement that it would align itself on the demands and the aspirations, all legitimate, of the society. Hamas probably discovered in the last 2 months that Damascus might not be as comfortable a place to be located in, and maybe discovered that the Palestinian house is where they legitimately belong, and that we all should be very comfortable in that Palestinian house. So events in Syria were decisive. Events in Egypt were equally as decisive for a variety of other considerations. You know, Egypt is the country which is the lungs of Palestine. We have two lungs in Palestine, Egypt and Jordan. We breathe through those two lungs towards the Arab hinterland. Egypt has always been the backbone of the Arab world because it's the biggest country, it has a superb elite historically. There is the regime that was 30 years old, but there is the state in Egypt that is 7,000-year-old. And let me tell you, I'm very happy that because of the revolution that occurred in Egypt, Egypt is recovering the lost ground and regaining its previous leading locomotive role. I will not concede from you. I prefer to have Egypt as the leading regional power than Qatar. Why? Because they have all the ingredients of that leading role, while others might not be intellectually and demographically, geographically well equipped for that role. And Egypt, diminished by 30 years of stagnation, was diminished regionally to have other competitors that theoretically should not be a match for Egypt. Some in Hamas had illusions that Egypt, because of the fall of Mubarak, will immediately align themselves on the radical wing of Hamas, will adopt the culture of resistance the way it was undefined but usually often invoked, and that immediately they will cancel the Israeli-Egyptian treaty and all the rest. This did not occur because Egypt, there is more continuity on foreign policy, but the important factor is that Egypt will be doing policy with national dignity, something that was inexistent in the last years. So this is why Egypt has been more sensitive to the ordeal of the Gaza population, are opening up the Rafah boundaries. And they signaled to Hamas, no, we are not going to align ourselves on you, but we are going to cooperate better with the Palestinian Authority, which we hope you will be part of. So Egypt, new Egypt, became more sensitive to Palestinian suffering and aspiration, but also encouraging national unity and not partisan politics, etc. So all those factors led to them. We were realistic in the agreement signed. We spoke of a phased approach. First of all, a government of independents and technocrats that enjoy the support of the political parties. I believe it's a good way to start a transitional period, healing the rift and the division. And let me tell you, my friend, I believe often independents and technocrats might be much better managers of the economy and the society than political leaders that are much better with the spoken word, but not that good in the management of the economy and the society. So, theoretically, that government should be announced in the coming days. I would have liked it to be announced the day of Netanyahu on Capitol Hill, to torpedo really the pre-written speech, belligerent, vehement, easy, etc., that he has written and obtained great applause for. Then, parallel to that, once we have that government of technocrats, we have to revitalize the PLO, because we still believe in the supremacy of the PLO in Palestinian institutional frameworks. Why? Because the PLO represents the totality of the Palestinian people, the 11 million Palestinians, more than half being outside of mandatory Palestine, either to the immediate periphery or the four corners of the world, from Scandinavia to Pennsylvania to California to Australia. And I believe that this geographic, demographic dispersion of the Palestinian people, which is the symptom of our tragedy, can be turned into a tool of empowerment in our global lobbying. You know, there is a new concept in international relations, global tribes, and today we are the global tribe par excellence. We can turn our demographic dispersion into a tool of political empowerment. So revitalization of the PLO, and I believe it's a pity that the PLO in a way was allowed to go dormant in previous years. We can handle both tasks at the same time. In the meantime, sir, I believe we should create in Palestinian society a new mood. We need today to revisit every assumption we have had in a responsible manner. I always said we should engage in a fruitful dialogue between respectable loyalty and responsible criticism. And my opinion in the past and today is that we never had the authority we deserve nor the opposition we need. We have an authority, we deserve better. We have many oppositions, we deserve also, and we need better oppositions. And I believe between those who have respectable attitudes of loyalty and those who have responsible attitudes of criticism, that category of people, left, right, and center, should today engage in revisiting everything: the strategy, the tactics, the discourse, the methods and modalities of organization. We are now in the 21st century. The discourse of the 50s and 60s is no more relevant. It's no more appealing and appetizing to the new generations. And speaking to new generations, I always tell them, don't allow my generation to colonize your future. Please be the keepers of the flame, take the initiative without discarding the accumulated experience of my generation. We need the stamina, the energy, and the innocence of the new generation, but also the experience accumulated of the older generation. I'm hopeful for the future, and I always say, unfortunately, in Palestinian society, pessimism was elevated by some as though it was the only criteria of measurement of one's patriotism. And whenever Palestinians met, you would see us competing in our pessimism, probably to demonstrate that we are more wounded by the unacceptable status quo, and without noticing that elevating pessimism as the criteria of measurement of one's patriotism is an extremely frustrating and even castrating attitude. Only optimists make history, but credible optimists, not the naive optimism. And I always used to say to friends, history is usually undecided. Let's, by our activity and by our mobilization and by our activism, help history make the right choice.
I just want to follow up on the question about reconciliation with another question on that point. The parties are now talking about the formation of a government, as you mentioned, and there seems to be disagreement over who will play the role of prime minister, particularly a disagreement over whether or not Salam Fayyad will play that role. What do you think about that? How do you feel about Salam Fayyad continuing in that role? And do you think that if he does, because of course he is associated or affiliated with the Ramallah-based PA that had been in place for several years now, affiliated with Fatah, that his continuing as a PM can in fact signify a genuine turning of the page from the disputes of the past?
Very important question, and since you're asking, if you ask me my first preference, I would say we have to re-invite Salam Fayyad to lead the coming government for a simple reason. I believe Salam Fayyad has been an impeccable manager. He's a technocrat. I have no doubt about his patriotism, and he has done an impeccable job in extremely difficult conditions and in under duress. And I believe he's acceptable, and I always told him that I pity him because he receives very hurtful and undeserved harsh criticism, and he has had to put up with also wounding, humiliating, and undeserved praise that he doesn't deserve. So he has put up with much. I believe our society is full of very competent people and talented people, so potentially we have a plethora of possible candidates. But let me tell you, since we have one who's okay, who's done a good job, why ask somebody else to step in and learn that complicated job of navigating under duress, probably blundering by trial and error frequently, while Salam Fayyad has done, in my opinion, a very good job and doesn't need to relearn the duties that he had. But this is subject to the agreement of the factions. This is what we agreed on, and I hope that voluntarily all the factions involved will choose him as. I know for a fact, for example, that all the left-wing components of the PLO seem to have voiced their preference for Salam Fayyad, he the independent. But we leave it to the interaction of the factions, and I hope they don't take too much time deciding on the names of individuals. Yet I tell you that our society is full of capable people, and it's not reduced to only one who has the necessary qualifications. Political factions have to show maturity. And I, in politics, have always advocated that we should become aware of the advantage of intangible gains. Not all the gains for political parties are materially touchable. There are the intangibles. For example, if my interlocutor in domestic politics shows flexibility and allows the emergence of a government faster, it's an intangible gain, creating better working relations between the two of us, which will have repercussions and reverberations on a variety of other issues. So I was always attracting attention to the importance of intangible gains and not to be just materialistic, that my choice should be the one adopted by others. You know, there was a cartoon 30 years ago that I've seen showing the political domestic game with many people on a playground, with one holding the ball saying, you either play the game I want or I'll take that ball home and leave you without a ball. Nobody should have that attitude. The ball should continue circulating. Number two, sir, George Korm, a wonderful analyst from Lebanon, analyzing the tragedies of Lebanon, but it's applicable on Iraq, it's applicable on Palestine, said, all components have a minority complex, and all grew accustomed to seek an external alliance to prevail domestically rather than spend time in the domestic dialogue. In Lebanon, that was obvious. Each of the components preferred an external alliance to prevail. In Palestine, for a period, regional factors became more important than domestic internal consideration. I'm in favor of a respectful intra-Palestinian dialogue from now on, leaving aside and neutralizing external factors. We should proclaim and behave and exercise our autonomy and independence of spirit. And I believe agreeing on a government should not be a difficult process necessitating more than 4 weeks that were given. And I believe that it's not so appetizing to be a Palestinian minister or whatever, because it's a challenge, it's exhausting, it's challenging for one's nervous system. And this is why I'm surprised that so many are today hoping to be future ministers. We can all serve without having titles. We need independence, and it's within our grasp if we put our act together.
Let's turn now to Washington. A couple weeks ago, we saw the Israeli Prime Minister come to the United States. Just before that, the President of the United States had delivered an important address on the Middle East, and he talked about the question of Palestine. And during his speech, had basically reiterated most of the demands that the Israeli Prime Minister had laid out. And despite this, the Israeli Prime Minister found a way to oppose what the U.S. President was saying about his vision for moving forward, and spoke before the United States Congress in direct opposition to the President of the United States, and received vociferous standing ovations from the United States Congress. Given all of this, and this is certainly not anything new in Washington, but an exclamation point really on several years of a consistent pattern. How are Palestinians within the leadership viewing these events, and how does it inform their belief about whether or not Washington can ever be an even-handed mediator?
First of all, concerning the peace process, you said it yourself, it's non-existent now. For 20 years we had a process but no peace. Now we neither have this or that. And what became durable was the process and not peace that became permanent and lasting. The Israelis wanted to gain time, protract the exercise, change the reality on the ground, create what they believe is irreversible realities through the elastic growth of the illegal settlements and all the rest. The presidency of Obama, I would not concede from you that I have always viewed candidate Obama and President Obama favorably. My opinion when he started his presidential campaign was to say he is a candidate that is reawakening American idealism, and there is a big reservoir of American idealism. He's the candidate who can reconcile America with itself and America with the world, and there was a need for that type of reconciliations, domestic and international. Unfortunately, he has not delivered, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to hold still that favorable opinion because of absence of delivery. But I would like to tell you that unfortunately he has lost 4 battles with Prime Minister Netanyahu in the confrontation of wills. He has tried. His different previous speeches, which were better inspired than his last 2 speeches, were really excellent, with great potential promise, and he raised expectations. But unfortunately, in the American political system, a favorably inclined president towards peace and possible justice in the Middle East is crippled by Capitol Hill. And to tell you frankly, we observers from the third world, we are often astounded at the way Capitol Hill functions or malfunctions. I just read a few days ago an article by Yuri Avneri, a very self-respecting Israeli who comments on the attitude of Congress receiving Netanyahu, and he says it reminded him of the Soviet Supreme during Stalin's period, where congressmen then would be afraid not to stand up and applaud repeatedly because they might end up in Siberia. And here the surprising paradox was that all those undeserved repeated collective standing ovations were not for a local dictator but for a foreign leader, which is astounding. I believe that unfortunately the pro-Israeli lobby has domesticated and tamed Capitol Hill, and congressmen, senators grew accustomed in campaigning more in Tel Aviv than in Tennessee, more in Jerusalem than in Georgia, more in Beersheba than in Boston, and many are not showing dual loyalty but one single loyalty, because each time the president of the USA differs with the Prime Minister of Israel, they take sides, and usually not with the American president but with the foreign leader from Israel. Yet I believe President Obama made 2 mistakes. I believe he was unaware of the change of the center of gravity within the American Jewish community, and I believe there is a significant change. That Jewish American community was always in the forefront of civil rights, yet after 1967, because of their attachment to Israel, they were reduced into defending the indefensible, to the extent that many today feel uncomfortable and see Israeli misbehavior as a source of embarrassment. And there are new forces emerging that I believe President Obama did not encourage and recruit and mobilize well enough for a more audacious American approach. He went back to the old horses of Dennis Ross, whom I call Dennis the Menace. And I, for one, believe that Dennis Ross and company sabotaged Senator Mitchell from day one, because Mitchell was well-inclined, well-intentioned, had the full trust of the president, was nominated on the first day of Obama in the White House, signaling the priority devoted to that issue. And I believe Dennis Ross and company really sabotaged Senator Mitchell, who from the first few months started to think of withdrawing gracefully because of. The question is America, the other grievance I have concerning President Obama. Obama, interestingly, is a multilateralist, not a unilateralist like the previous administration. I believe he has not used the international community well enough to counterbalance the domestic pressure on him. He could have invoked the partners of the US administration in the quartet, meaning Europe, who's increasingly irritated by American immobilism and self-inflicted impotence, Russia, and the UN, which represents everybody else. He could have used the partners of America within the quartet to counterbalance the domestic pressure on him. And let me tell you, he could have even waived that other idea of maybe the quartet needs to be expanded to incorporate other actors that are significant in the international system, like China, India, South Africa, Brazil, and Turkey, so that we have a diplomatic machinery more reflective of the international realities of today. That again could have been used as a tool to counterbalance the pressures of that pro-Israeli lobby that has hijacked the formulation of American foreign policy. I believe that here in America it's unavoidable to have an intellectual battle with the pro-Israeli lobby. And I believe within the administration, surprisingly many in the Pentagon and in the senior echelons of the army, because they are not subjected to elections, re-elections, and don't have need for fundraising, they are freer to express the national interest. And I think Petraeus made a very interesting hearing session on Capitol Hill where he spoke of how the unresolved Palestinian problem affects negatively American national interests around the globe. And I believe the battle we should wage is against those congressmen and senators who are really undignified and who have been tamed and domesticated by that lobby that grew accustomed in using one muscle too many, going one pressure too far. And I believe that we have to wage that intellectual battle by saying we understood the message. America is committed to Israel's existence. But is America committed to Israel's expansion? America doesn't need to adopt, endorse, and protect every Israeli capricious preference. In Israel, there is a debate about the wisdom of keeping the hilltops of the West Bank. But what is America's interest in Israel keeping the hilltops of the West Bank? Many in America today are aware that the perception and the semblance of collusion between America and Israel is what put America on a collision course. And I always say, Palestine is the test between courage and cowardice, and Palestine can be not only the test for American credibility, believability, but lovability. Can you imagine how much loved Americans would be around the world if America was seen to be the locomotive for the ending of occupation, the birth of Palestinian statehood? I believe that many Jews should favor that approach. And I always tell Israeli and Jewish interlocutors, a Palestinian state is not only the right of us, the Palestinians, it's a moral duty and an ethical obligation for you, Israelis and Jews, because you, more than anybody else in the world, know the price we have had to pay collectively and individually for the emergence of the Israeli state. And the faster it occurs, and with your contribution and participation, the better it is for future reconciliation. History, again, undecided. But I want to say that I haven't despaired of changing American attitudes towards the peace process and our rights, sufferings, and aspiration. If one was to be resigned on that issue, it would be really devastating and depressing, because let's face it, America is today the prevailing, predominant, overwhelmingly so, power in the international system. But I haven't despaired of winning America to what I consider is the most rational course of action. My arguments with my American interlocutors are the following. America is a fascinating society. It's a nation of nations. It's the world itself. It's the world en miniature. And America, in this unipolar, monopolar international system, should be the one who adopts non-alignment in regional conflicts. This is why the honest broker idea and even-handedness and equidistance and principled approaches on the basis of international law are all arguments that I believe can have much mileage if we use them adequately. And I believe non-alignment in a unipolar world should be what characterizes American foreign policy. Why? Because it's a nation of nations. When America sides, like in the Middle East, with one belligerent actor, Israel in that case, not only does it alienate unnecessarily all the other players in the region, but it also alienates, offends, ghettoizes a domestic component of its own national social fabric. Being a Palestinian American, an Arab American, a Muslim American was not easy in the last decades because of this feeling that your country of adoption is insensitive to the sufferings of your country of origin. I believe that Obama has 5-6 years now still to go. And my expectation, sir, is the following. What we should work for is an Eisenhower moment. What is the Eisenhower moment? President Eisenhower, very popular because of his role during the Second World War, in a presidential year, a presidential election year, 56, when we witnessed the tripartite aggression against Egypt by England, France, and Israel, and the occupation of the Sinai, President Eisenhower, with a phone call, had Israel withdraw totally out of the Sinai. One phone call, one day. That was the behavior of a superpower, not one with a diminished status of self-inflicted impotence the way we have witnessed it afterwards. And I believe we should work and wait for that Eisenhower moment. But this time, the President of the United States and the White House has carrots for Israel that Eisenhower did not have. And Eisenhower was dealing with Ben-Gurion, that roaring lion, to whom, if you compare Sharon and Netanyahu, they look like lambs in comparison. Today, the President of the United States has carrots to offer Israel by telling them if they adopt the two-state solution along the 67 boundaries, it's not only the two-state solution, it's a 57-state solution, because that proposal was endorsed by the Arab League, 22 countries, and the Conference of Islamic Countries, 57 countries. If I were a Jew or an Israeli banco, I'll take that proposal, because this is what I pretended for 63 years to be my purpose and my aim. So the President of the United States today has trump cards. He should be encouraged to use them. But he seems, Barack Obama, to be isolated in Washington. Netanyahu, by the way, according to Haaretz, when he sits with his immediate entourage, he tells them, I'm stronger than Obama in Washington. That's the way he speaks. I'm stronger than Obama in Washington. So it's up to us to create the constellation of forces to support an Obama in being more forward-looking and more audacious. What is that constellation? I believe it should be made of Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, the dovish wing of the Jewish American community, but also the Hispanic community and the Afro-American community and the mainstream churches who are sound on the issue, unlike the evangelicals who are folkloric and have delirious theological approaches. With that constellation around which many other forces will coagulate, sociological, ethnic, political, or schools of thought, etc., I believe there is a comfortable majority in this country to support an audaciously adopted policy by the occupant of the White House. But up to us to construct that constellation. Nobody else will do it for us. We are the priority for ourselves. No, we are not anybody else's priority. If it's not done, I am very fearful of the future. I always say to interlocutors, we the Palestinians have become unreasonably reasonable. We play a win-win equation. The Israelis still want to play with us win-lose equation. No society on earth likes to be condemned to be the eternal loser of history. There will always be a minority that will emerge, and minority make history, not majorities. A minority that will emerge angry, saying, if I'm condemned to be the eternal loser of history, to hell with the temple, down with the pillars, I play loser-loser. I'm still, Youssef, in favor of win-win. But the Israelis want to play win-lose. Let's hope we will never reach the point when the minority emerges to play lose-lose.
Lastly, let's talk about the drive now for Palestinian statehood or membership or recognition through the United Nations. This has been something that's been talked about for some time now. In February, of course, the Palestinians put forward through the United Nations Security Council a resolution condemning Israeli settlements using the exact same language that U.S. principals, including Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, used. And we saw at that point 14 states of the 15 voted for it, but the United States vetoed its own policy on settlements, as they have done consistently with UN Security Council resolutions critical of Israel. The United States has also said that they intend to veto any Palestinian attempt for a resolution to the conflict through the United Nations. And yet Palestinian leaders are deciding to go forward with this. If that does happen, if we have a vote in the United Nations, and whether the United States vetoes or not, there's many people wondering what's the next step, what happens afterwards. Some Palestinians have suggested that if that's the case, the Palestinians then hand over the keys or throw in the towel and give up the Palestinian Authority or give up their participation in total of a peace process that is really leading nowhere. Talk more about the day after and how you see this strategy in the United Nations playing out.
First of all, let's hope that there will be no throwing the towel moment in our national history. And those who believe that it would be a good idea to dissolve the Palestinian Authority and give back the keys to the Israelis don't understand the nature of the Israeli regime and the way they look at us as undesirables in our own homeland, and how their strategy has been how to acquire as much of our geography as possible with as little of our demography as possible. And believe you me, they won't rush to fill the vacuum and step in to shoulder their responsibility. On the contrary, they would like our life to be miserable and unlivable, so that we voluntarily decide to depart beyond the River Jordan and even beyond the Pacific and the Atlantic. We have to assume the burden of the management of our society and our future, and I hope we will not fall into mistakes we have committed through incompetence and inexperience in the previous decades. And I believe we have to look at the future where we are actors of our own history, not subjects of history decided by objects of history, a history decided upon by others. Now the UN, sir. I just came back from New York, Manhattan, and met a variety of senior diplomats working either for representing governments and states, but many of them working at senior echelons within the UN machinery, in the UN General Secretariat and many of the specialized institutions. And it's interesting, I found that there was some great excitement among the international civil servants working in the UN, because our possible approach to the UN for conflict resolution is giving again importance and relevance to that institution that was often humiliated and marginalized in important decisive issues. So they were waiting with excitement, moment M, September, etc. Yet, I will not concede from you, there are still discussions in the Palestinian leadership and with all our other interlocutors on what should happen in September. And I'm sorry if there was some confusion emanating from a variety of statements made. I don't think that the strategy has been final or as refined as it ought to have been. It's being discussed, and many senior experts in international law, constitutional law, are being consulted so that we don't run the risk of making a blunder, and blunders are paid very dearly these days. From my visit to New York, friends were telling me, and very well-intentioned and very well-inclined interlocutors were telling me, Afif, maybe you have an interest in delinking and decoupling two issues that are mixed in the discussion. And I said, what are those two issues? And they said, there is the recognition of Palestinian statehood, which is one issue, and there is the admission of Palestine as member state in the UN. And it seems, according to the interpretation for the moment prevalent in New York, admission of members necessitates a Security Council positive recommendation with no vetoes. So if between now and September we have not changed the attitude of the American administration, which, as you mentioned, unfortunately on the settlement issue, America vetoed its own policy, and the draft resolution submitted was even in the words used by successive American administrations. And even that, because of the power of the lobby, the Inquisition that I call in Washington, Washington vetoed and torpedoed its own policy on the settlement issue. So if from now until September we have not succeeded in persuading the Americans not to take a negative attitude by a veto, or not to take that wise attitude of an abstention, which will result as being a positive rather, because it would allow the resolution, without American acquiescence and the recommendation of the Security Council, it seems it's not possible to have admission of Palestine as a member of the UN. But Palestine is already an observer, permanent observer in the UN system, where we have already for 20 years all the rights and the prerogatives except taking part in vote. But the other issue is recognition of statehood along the 67. And my interlocutors in Manhattan were telling me that is doable. There is great excitement among the international community, the 190 countries. You will get an overwhelming majority. And among the personnel of the UN system, great excitement that the UN can give a signal to a stalling peace process, that's the destination of a reinvigorated peace process. It should lead to that destination and nowhere else. And that there are certain rules of law that belligerent parties should respect. And international law is there to codify the behavior of belligerent parties. And many among those international senior civil servants, they are offended that the UN was often marginalized or looked at as though it was only a very costly Hyde Park corner, like in London, where everybody can say whatever they want with no translation of that into the real. Now, you will ask me, okay, whatever strategy is adopted in September in the UN General Assembly, whether we decouple and delink the two issues of statehood recognized and membership as submitted, whatever the approach adopted, what will be the morning after, the night before like? We have to make sure that it's not identical to the previous decade. But the Israelis will make sure even to punish us for our diplomatic audacity. They will try to punish us by quelling any possible mass peaceful demonstration that might accompany the debate in the UN. And let me tell you, in the Algerian independence, paradoxically, the French army had almost won the military battle by crushing the Algerian at great cost, but there was the solidity of the Algerian movement. But militarily speaking, it was as though the French army had won militarily against the Algerian revolution. But when the issue was debated in the UN, the mass uprising, peaceful, of the population of Algiers and Algeria claiming independence is what switched the balance towards the world recognizing it. And de Gaulle, who was a statesman like they never do them anymore these days, admitted the inevitability of recognizing. So I want to remind our people and the world of the primacy of politics. And I believe when we come to moment M, the debate of those issues, coupled, decoupled, linked or delinked in the UN, we need the Palestinian people in great cohesion and with great perseverance to accompany the debate by a peaceful expression, collective, of our ceaseless quest for independence, but in a peaceful manner to accompany the debate. If it could be supported by the Arab environment of Palestine, and it will be extremely helpful, but always in a meaningful, peaceful manner, not allowing regimes to manipulate the mass movement of solidarity to be expressed as it happened in previous days and weeks. I believe the aesthetics of the moment would be great in helping us persuade those reluctant players that up to now have tried to obstruct. History is undecided, and it's our duty to help history make the right choice.
Ambassador, thank you very much.
It was a privilege.
Great to have you.
Wish you the best.